I don't know about you, but it seems like ice baths are all the rage, whether you're a Wim Hof person or you don't know who Wim Hof is. And by the way, I talked to him like 11 years ago. That was a very entertaining conversation. But anyway, point being, maybe an ice bath is a perfect thing for you. Maybe it's the worst thing you could possibly do. And this is true about a lot of different things that impact training and your goals, whether you're walking, hiking, or doing whatever else. And that's what we're going to explore on today's episode of the Movement, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body, typically starting feet first, because those are your foundation, but we're going to talk about some other things today as well. And we break down the propaganda, the mythology, and sometimes the straight out lies you've been told about what it takes to run or walk or hike or play or do yoga or CrossFit or play Dance Dance Revolution or eSIM racing or any of the myriad things that you do with your body, and to do those enjoyably and effectively and efficiently. Did I say enjoyably? Trick question. I know I did. Because look, if you're not having fun, you're not going to keep it up anyway. So find a thing that you like to do that's enjoyable. I'm Stephen Sashen, your host of the Movement podcast from zeroshoes.com. And we call it the Movement because we, all of us, are creating a movement, more about that in a second, about natural movement, letting your body do what it's made to do. And the movement part that involves you is really simple. Go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com. There's nothing you need to do to join. There's no cost. There's no secret handshake. There is a dance step you have to learn, but don't worry about that. No, there's not. But what you'll find there is all the previous episodes, all the ways you can engage with us on social media, etc., and basically all the ways that you can help promote this by giving us a thumbs up, giving us a good review, giving us, hitting the like and the bell icon on YouTube. I mean, look, you know the drill. If you want to be part of the tribe, please subscribe. So let's get started. Jordan, do me a favor. Tell people who you are and what you're doing here.
Yeah, well, I'll start off. Thank you, Stephen, for having me over here. My name is Jordan Abecasis. I'm a biomedical engineer, but a strength and conditioning coach for about 8 years, divesting most of my time into mobility, stability, and strength trainings, and helping other people move a little bit better, live a little bit easier, helping them get back to the things that they want to do most.
First of all, thank you. Secondly, you just reminded me, one of my favorite things is the gap between what people know or hear or even believe and what they do. And when we say strength training, it hit me, there's a lot of people who are involved in what we do who are runners of varying kinds. And there's no question at all. The research could not be more clear that some strength training would make them better, would make them healthier, would make them less prone to injury. There's actually research from Dr. Isabel Sacco, where she had people who ran in regular shoes do half of them did an 8-week foot strengthening exercise program. And over the course of a year, that group had 250% fewer injuries than the group who didn't do the exercise program. And it was a simple program, really easy foot strengthening thing, but it's amazing how few people would do that. So before we even get into what I teased at the beginning of this, having to do with ice baths and other training, can we just talk about, as a strength and conditioning professional, what you bump into, because we're going to be giving people ideas of things to do, but what do you bump into to get people to actually implement, to actually do the things that will be helpful?
Most of the restrictions that I see come around a fear of pain or a limitation in their own personal movements that they've almost curated in their minds, or someone had implanted this kind of seed that they need to restrict movement in order to stay healthy because they may cause some type of further damage to whether it be a joint or muscle or of some type of sort. And that's a lot of pain science, which, that's not necessarily my expertise. That's a whole science on its own to kind of dive into that. But it's learning how to be comfortable within your own body, and then you can progress from there into further advanced movements that actually build and stabilitate or facilitate muscle growth to help overall increase performance throughout daily life.
Would it be incorrect to say that, to reframe what you said in one way, that many people are very willing just to argue for their limitations?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can find some type of excuse to get out of progressing, I'm sure some people will find some type of way to hinder themselves. Self-sabotage is definitely something that we see very common.
Well, I'm not a big fan of the phrase self-sabotage, because if you really dive in, you'll find that the person had a good reason for doing what they did.
Yeah.
It's just not consistent with what they're saying, but it's consistent with what they think or believe.
Yeah, it's definitely in line. And you see individuals holding themselves back for good reasons. Like, pain is a good reason. Pain, our bodies are in tune. If we're in pain, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to stop doing whatever we're doing. Right. So that's natural. But and it's, slowly coming out now, the last 5 years of research has really been incredible, and seeing how we're progressing the field of physical rehabilitation and getting people moving much faster. I mean, just 10 years ago, I don't know if or 20 years ago, if you had a cast on, but they would keep the cast on for triple, sometimes quadruple the length of what they're doing now. So they're getting people out of casts very much earlier on, getting them moving much quicker, because we know that movement is key here to facilitating health.
It's funny. We don't have to dive into feet per se, but what's so interesting to me is that everyone believes that getting, moving as much as possible, as pain-free as possible is the best thing to do. Except when it comes to feet, everyone's just ready to have their feet immobilized and not moving, no matter what the problem is, even if it has nothing to do with your feet. It's like you go into the broken wrist. It's like, ooh, we're going to give you orthotics because clearly your posture is affecting how you're using your wrist. And therefore it's like, whoa, slow down. So in fact, Dr. Irene Davis, that was her kind of, wake up moment when she was teaching physical therapists all about getting people moving as much as possible, but then was going on, well, then why are we posting their feet with an orthotic that doesn't allow their foot to move, even if they have a foot injury? And so that was when she, I gotta look into this. And now she's the number one researcher about natural movement.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you said it spot on. It's our feet are definitely one of the most underutilized systems and modern technology, and I'm not sure why it took so long to progress towards individuals like yourself who have done such great progress in the field and have advanced our footwear and our mobility, and on helping individuals understand that the structure of the foot is so critical for balance, stability, pain, movement, and just overall bodily health altogether, posture, even shoulder movements. I mean, it's all connected throughout this kinetic chain that we move. And what are we doing the most? For most people, it's walking, standing or walking.
Well, here I can resolve that conundrum for you really quickly. Where's the money? The money is not in telling people to use their feet and do a simple exercise program. The money is making someone buy a $500 orthotic, every year or more.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a comment I make about modern running shoes. I go, clearly they don't really care about you, because if they did, they would try to undermine the multi-billion-dollar market for products that you need to add to your shoes to make them work better. It's like the shoe companies know what a Dr. Scholl's insole does. They know what a Superfeet orthotic does. They know all these things. They could make money if they just sort of built that into the shoe in some way, and yet they don't. So that's an interesting thing.
I heard you mention that on a separate podcast. Like either they have completely ignored the research altogether, or they haven't been smart enough to utilize this and to actually curate something correctly.
Well, there's actually another option. The other option is that they don't believe those things actually work in the way that people think, which I could make that argument. But more, they don't have another option to make their products work, which would require them to make stuff that looks like what we do. So there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of conflicting goals that if your primary goal is to make your shareholders happy, then that gets in the way of right for people.
Right. No.
Well, so let's back up to what I teased at the beginning, because I find this really interesting. I'm going to start with just the thing that I mentioned, and then I'd love you to paint the bigger context of how we got to from there. And that's the magic and question of ice baths. Now, I will confess that we have a little like gazebo outside of our house with a hot tub in it, and it also has a cold plunge. It's basically just a rubber tub that's about 24 inches in diameter and 30 inches high. And it's used for people who don't have a bathtub. You put this in the shower, fill it up with water, and you get in. I just have it filled with water that, especially now that it's getting to be in the teens every night in the morning, I have to chip away the ice to use it. Now, I don't use it for the reasons that people think you're supposed to use it. I don't use it because I have ideas about inflammation or recovery or whatever. I use it because I just get a kick out of how after I'm in there for a little while and I get out, I'm just way more alert, and it's very entertaining. There's something about, especially now when the water's 32 degrees, I get in there and I'm just curious, how many seconds is it going to take till I want to get the hell out of here? And then how many times am I going to resist getting out before I go, and we're done? And in fact, sorry, I got to say it this way. I never even have the thought I've got to get out. I have the thought like, let me see if I can stay. And then the next thing I know, I'm getting out. So let's talk ice baths and the confusion about those and the bigger context that you framed that in when we were chatting before we started recording this.
So ice baths, and there's so much research now that has come out about cryotherapy and ice bath work and utilizing this as a recovery tool. And there's definitely a misconception here if you were to be utilizing an ice bath as a form of recovery in the sense of muscle growth, you will be blunting your effects dramatically. And I was just listening to Dr. Huberman the other day about this, and it makes sense if you were to set your body inside of something very cold, and your whole entire system is going to clamp down. Your blood flow is going to be restricted, the nutrient sources are going to be restricted, the metabolism is going to be restricted, right? So you're blunting a lot of these stress effects, facilitate muscle growth, as long as that's only if you do it too close to your training sessions, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily something that if you per se yourself, I love the mental benefits, and I love feeling the adrenaline that kicks on when I set myself in ice cold water, because that's exactly what's happening. Your body's going to hit into an adrenaline, epinephrine, fight or flight mode. Holy cow, I'm freezing, and you're battling this game, and then you get out, you feel great, right? You absolutely, there's no doubt about it. It's just when you want to talk about muscle growth and you want to facilitate actually building or developing as much hypertrophy in the actual muscle cell itself, you want to allow the body to go through these natural cycles and facilitate as much of an anabolic cascade as you can without blunting that effect.
And I mean, there are a number of things similarly that just get in the way of what we think is helpful. I mean, because they feel good or it's a good story, like just antioxidants in general. Similar story is that antioxidants get in the way of letting your body do what it's supposed to do, which is because of the oxidative stress, because of the free radicals that you're generated from whatever you've done, that's initiating the supercompensation, the healing response that is going to make you better. But if you get in the way of that, then you've just, ruined it. And by the way, for anyone who's not looking, if you don't think you're looking for muscle growth or hypertrophy, you may be mistaken, especially if you're getting older, because then, what you're doing is combating the fact that you're just going to be losing muscle mass in general. I just jumped into that. Do you want to add anything to that mix?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think that ice baths are great, and I think difference between hot and cold frequencies is definitely beneficial for the body overall for long-term longevity and health, mental health. I mean, there's a slew of research that benefits that, but anybody who's actually done something like this will tell you that firsthand themselves is how great they feel when they go ahead and go through these routines. In regard to an older athlete, we'll say 65, 70 plus, right? If you're really looking to maintain as much as you have and to increase overall health span at that point, right? You're not in this developmental stage in your 20s and 30s like you were. And as a progressive athlete who needs to build to get prepared to gear towards either professional sports or even higher level athletic trainings. Right. So it's definitely very subjective and personalized based off of what your true goals are and how you view and what you want to view, at least your outcomes to be. And I'll caveat back to that is that if you aren't going to necessarily want to stop doing these things that make you feel good, but you should have the understanding that the research shows that you need to delay this time response by some heavy training sets and possibly by about a day before you go ahead and progress into a heavy ice bath cold plunge, because the metabolic cascade has already started by that time, right? You've already got the signaling, you've got the growth, and it's not gonna for the average individual who's doing average to even moderate intensity exercise, that it's going to be a minimal difference, seeing a minimal effect as long as you're separating it away from your exercise trainings.
It's a good idea. And I mean, I am flashing back to the times where we'd finish a track workout and then jump in Boulder Creek because it felt really good, in part because we were all toasty and warm, but we definitely were not helping ourselves in terms of just maximizing the impact of what that workout did to eventually get, again, muscle growth is going to be highly genetically determined as well. If you produce a lot of myostatin, you will not grow muscles no matter how much you work. If you produce none, you will not be able to avoid growing. We had a guy on our gymnastics team in high school who had, I can't remember the name of the disease where you don't produce myostatin. And the guy just kept getting bigger every day. Just, a little bit of work and he just kept getting bigger. We used to tease him. It's like, what did you do for your biceps today? He goes, Cheerios. And the most mild stimulus would just make him get bigger. It was amazing and sad because that disease has a lot of other implications, and he died in his 20s.
I'm sorry.
But suffice it to say, it's like anything you're doing, there's going to be some growth component to it. And I guess, maybe it does make sense if you want to balance it with just your lifestyle. If you don't care, knock yourself out. But sorry, and you gave me a flashback when you said hot and cold alternating. We were in Finland 14 years ago-ish for the World Masters Track and Field Championships. And we were staying with some friends. Actually, this is the year before that, maybe. So this is like 15 years ago. Staying with some friends who had a house on a lake in Finland, and it's been in their family for like 400 years. And so they had a Finnish sauna, or for those of you who've been to Finland, a Finnish sauna that was in a teepee, and it was on the lake that had just unfrozen like 4 days earlier. So anyway, I'm getting in the sauna, jumping in the lake, getting in the sauna, jumping in the lake. And the father of the people we're staying with came by and said, how many times you jump in the lake? I said, I don't know, 7, 8. He goes, oh my God. Apparently that's like a big macho thing, which I did not know. So I got instant street cred for jumping in the just previously frozen lake 7 or 8 times.
They mentioned over in Sweden and Finland and those parts of Europe. I mean, being doing sauna routines is normal custom work, almost like taking a shower over there. I mean,
in Finland, more saunas than people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Any decent office building has a communal sauna to use. It's very civilized.
Very, very neat. I want to bring you back a little bit to when you were track training, when you were younger and you were jumping into Boulder Creek. Were you at a point where you were primarily developing skill, or was this more of a growth phase for you?
That's an interesting question, and that's very kind of you to say younger. It was 15 years ago, but and I think I probably still did it until about 12 years ago. That I think I was really doing both. Because I was definitely trying to get stronger, because there's a definite correlation between certain kinds of strength and speed. And I was definitely working on form and technique, because I never really had any training in that before. And frankly, it's still something I'm still working on 15 years later. I'm always trying to improve my form and just getting more efficient. But the magic question, of course, is why do you ask?
Because when you get to that level of training, your skill will be improved by doing these recovery routines. But even though you're necessarily blunting muscle growth effects, because you're recovering at a faster rate, and by going through these types of ice bathing or swimming rituals that you were doing in freezing cold water in the creek, you should have seen a benefit. I would have imagined you had seen a benefit in your training styles overall.
It's hard to tell because I'm an old guy, so I'm 60 now. And frankly, the hardest lesson for me to learn in the early days when I got back into sprinting when I was 45 is how to do less, is how to have more time to recover in general, and how to, anytime I had the thought, maybe I'll just do one more 100-meter run. It's like, that's the time to stop. So when there's that, maybe bad idea. So I don't know, but because it would have been easy for me to wait for a day and do it a day later, because I'm not training every day. And I found that I really only have 2 decent speed days in me in a given week. I need that much, or maybe even a little more recovery. Like maybe I get 3 good workouts in every 2 weeks if I could arrange it that way. But to your point, just working on the skill part, that's a neurological thing, less than a metabolic thing. So that makes sense. That's clever.
Right. No, and that's where a lot of the research shows, and you'll see all the higher level athletes, whether they're baseball players who are under tremendous amounts of stress, or even the MMA fighters who are going in through these fight or flight stages. But once they get to the professional level, all of their routines are based around recovery solely. They're not looking, and that's why they have weight classes for these things. They don't differentiate. They don't want to build muscle and put on weight to escalate through the weight class. Right. So for them, for their sport specific training styles, an ice bath to help speed up recovery, whether it be before, after a workout, or even a day after, is always going to benefit them. Right. So once you've reached that level of skill, once you've built that foundation,
That's an interesting irony or an interesting sort of contradiction that since recovery is really important, and we know that certain performance enhancing drugs accelerate recovery, but they will also accelerate muscle growth. And if you're trying to stay in a lower weight class where you have a better strength to weight ratio, that would be, I imagine, for those people who are engaged at that level, that would be a challenging thing to balance.
Yeah, of course, they've got a slew of teams and coaches and members who are all helping them balance this type of training style in their recovery sessions. And we'll go, you can still build density, right? You can build muscular density without necessarily building muscular size. And yeah, you'll put on some weight, but it's not going to be anywhere near the point where, for say, a bodybuilder who's focusing on hypertrophy and volume will put on if they're doing a separate type of routine.
Well, that again, another interesting point, because if you're getting bigger, a lot of the weight is going to be just the intracellular water and other fluids. So if you're just getting if you're building density, are you doing that? What's happening at the cellular level that's allowing you to do that?
Well, the process is still similar, but it's going to be different in the way that the actual metabolic stress is perceived on the system, and of course, the ice is going to dampen that overall, regardless, right? So they will have, of course, some anabolic effect. It's not going to be like zero, but in regard to actual size facilitation and the way that, because you have different ways that the musculature can grow, it can swell, right? The muscles can well, and then they can also, but through any type of adaptation training, you're going to go through those micro tears. It's just what level are you actually facilitating that type of micro trauma? And is your recovery period allowing you to rebuild on top of that micro trauma as efficiently as possible, or are we optimizing more towards getting you back into shape to go back into the next round the following day?
Well, this brings us back to what I hinted at before and what we talked about briefly before we started, which was the difference between optimization and adaptation. And so just to make it easier for people to make the jump from where we just were to that part of the conversation, can you use the ice bath situation to highlight the difference between those two and then dive into optimization versus adaptation a little more specifically?
Yeah, so optimization is going to be more geared towards, we'll consider it towards the athletes that have already found their niche and have built the foundation of their body. Almost entirely, they're going to be over the age of at least 25, right? 26. And just for that primary reason, that's when you really see the big escalation in skill level, right? Because you've built a very, very solid, and of course, there are very young people. I mean, look at LeBron James. He was very young, very skilled, and very, very powerful at a young age. But you'll see as he got older, he didn't grow much more in size wise, but his skill continued to level, and that's the optimization piece. The adaptation would have been from his age of 18 to 25, and then his optimization would have been further on. Right. So when we talk about optimization for skill or lifestyle based trainings, we don't necessarily, someone may not necessarily want to be sore for 2 days in a certain muscle group for certain reasons. Maybe it will hinder their lifestyle effects. Maybe they're a physical labor job and they have to go back to work and they can't have their legs detrimentally sore. Yeah, it's going to have some effect on overall growth, but that's going to be a decision that they're going to make.
Well, let's also cut to the chase. You do a leg workout that really kills you that much, and you don't want to be that sore because you want to be able to sit on a toilet. I have on more than one occasion had to help myself down or walk downstairs backwards because I overdid a leg day.
Yeah, and of course, there's several things that play into this, and nutrition and sleep are also incredibly critical and creating a balanced recovery optimization routine as well as an adaptation based formula. Really, adaptation in a sense of musculature or muscular health is primarily driven, or at least regarded to, with hypertrophy. Right, that's going to be the hypertrophy is going to be our biggest indication for the muscular adaptation. You could make a claim to say that performance overall is an adaptation, but performance also leads in through neuromuscular stabilization and our CNS and PNS systems, as you mentioned earlier. So there's a little bit more to performance than there is necessarily to just strictly growth. Growth is a little bit easier to attain than than optimization is itself.
My undergraduate research when I was at Duke was on cognitive aspects of motor skill acquisition. And people really don't appreciate how much time it takes to lay down new neural pathways and get something, way back in your brainstem so you don't need to think about it and you can't do it wrong anymore. And it's, of course, different for different people based on neuroplastic events. And that's genetically determined to a significant amount. But suffice it to say, they also don't appreciate that the process of learning those new skills is what we call frustrating. And that's just the feeling, laying down new neural pathways. And it always takes, again, longer than you would like, which, and like at the same time, I mean, I don't know if I've just reframed it, but I love, like last night, every night I take my dog out for a little walk to go pee before we go to bed. And then we run home. And I just use that as a time to play with just, like for 20 meters, just to play with my form. And I'm always finding a little something where it's never going to be locked in. Or maybe it will at some point. I remember I'm ranting for a sec. I remember watching a video of Ben Johnson. He's about my age, and someone just was on the track and just decided to run with him. And the guy's, weighs, 50 pounds more than he did when he was competing, not nearly as muscular as when he was competing, but my God, his form was perfect. I mean, just could not have been better. It was beautiful to watch. I don't know where I'm going.
Yeah, I know, and also, I mean, just to revert back to your form, I know you've been dealing with some back issues as well that you've been mediating as well, and of course that's going to play a role in how you move, especially towards the end of the night. I'm sure you're a busy guy, and running towards the end of the night, you're gonna always find some critiques if you're not exactly perfect throughout the thing.
Well, that's true. But I mean, the fun thing about having a dog, so my wife and I had never had a dog before. And we got this guy, he's probably about 3. We got him 7 months ago. He's a rescue. And what I learned from having a dog is that I can run all out, full speed, no warm up at 6 a.m. because he can.
Wow.
And so I decided to see what happened. It's like, haven't had a problem yet. And sometimes I'm just not in the mood, but he's always in the mood. So that's a trick. So
that's a great training partner.
He really is. Well, he's great for overspeed because he's faster than I am. So I try to have him keep up with or stay with me for a little while, but then I'll let him go and I'll just do overspeed training because I'm just trying to keep up with him. And he's pulling me along. It's really entertaining. And he has so much fun when he's doing that. So backing up again, like in the context of optimization and adaptation, to loop back in our cold therapy or our cold plunge or cold water, however you want to do it, our cryotherapy. So do you want to say something a little more concrete about in those two phases, optimization versus adaptation? And I know we're being a little redundant when I ask this, say more about how you would apply that intervention in those two different phases you might be in. And also one other thing, if you would, for people who aren't just trying to get to a high level, but they're continuing to just do what they do, they're warrior athletes. Let's talk about optimization and adaptation as a sort of periodic thing as well. I'm imagining that there's an application there.
Yeah, and it's not something as, of course, straightforward, and everyone's individual training and their personal skill level is definitely going to be somewhat involved in this. But I will caveat to this: when we are gearing towards optimization, we're not going to necessarily care about blunting blood flow for a certain time period, because it will help systemic recovery overall. Now, if we're going to be gearing towards actual muscular hypertrophy and full adaptation of the musculature system itself, you're not going to want to go ahead and jump into a cold bath after your workouts, and you'll see a lot of the athletes go ahead and it's becoming a wave. We'll just let's all jump in a cold bath. And it's not necessarily going to be beneficial for everyone's goals. Now, to the degree that it actually is, it's going to be on the individual level and what you prefer. If you are going to accept the fact that the data shows that, hey, this is almost like taking Advil and you're basically creating an anti-inflammatory system by jumping in a cold bath, right? That is going to slow down muscular growth. That inflammatory cascade is what is driving hypertrophy. That is the metabolic cascade that you actually want to go ahead and continue through to build and to adapt the muscles to get larger and stronger over the course of time. So if you are gearing towards adaptation, and you would assume that most individuals who are into the gym are gearing towards adaptation, right? Because they're still building that foundation. For the most part, I believe it's 73% of individuals are under exercising in the United States right now, right? According to WHO, and it's quite a big amount. So even if they were doing 2 days a week, you're still going to want to maximize that type of effect for your body. You're not going to necessarily want to be jumping into a cold plunge every single day because you're not really placing the stress on your body to see the benefits of it. So we want to go ahead and gear towards optimizing or adapting our musculatures to get stronger, bigger, and allow us to progress in our lifestyle habits without necessarily impeding on this type of growth. And there's several things that we can do, and it's right. So we've got our nutrition. We have to hit our protein levels, right? Whether it be plant-based or animal-based, you have to hit your protein levels, and you want to go ahead and then optimize for sleep and somewhat of a recovery routine where you are not over stiffening yourself where you're not going to move the following day. Right? So you've got to find this healthy balance as to what works for you. When you start getting further into optimization and optimizing for specific motor patterns, like a pitcher, right? Hypertrophy is not the game for a pitcher to build. You don't want hypertrophy of the rotator cuff. You don't necessarily want large hypertrophy of a muscle that's going to inhibit mobility, right? So our goal is to optimize our ability to go ahead and have this more specific movement be greater and more skillful over time, right? And that's when we're going to start implementing more of a recovery-based routine rather than an adaptation-based routine.
So for people who are not, aspiring to be, to master some skill or be a professional athlete, again, are sort of, I hate the phrase weekend warriors, not that, but people who are trying to be fit, trying to be healthy, et cetera, what would you recommend, if anything, for them about how to, frame what they're doing in this context?
If you have the opportunity to jump into a cold plunge or go through hot and cold plunge, it's definitely going to be a benefit to separate that into its own individual day. And if you may even consider some low intensity steady state cardio on that type of day, if you are a fitness freak, but you definitely don't want to do a heavy lift and do a ton of volume on, especially like for your legs, which is an incredibly large portion of your muscular group. You're not going to want to go into the gym and blast your legs and then go straight into a cold plunge bath. It's not going to be beneficial for you. And actually, I would recommend even furthering that out from a day to even 2 days before to allow that growth to continue to facilitate rather than jumping right in and gearing towards because for the most part, while you may feel good in the moment, if you're restricting blood flow to the area, you're just going to dampen your recovery and your overall muscular adaptation in its own. So it will be beneficial overall for.
No, go ahead. Well, here, I'll jump in. By the way, we're having some connectivity issues. That raised the interesting question then, is what's your thought on heat therapy?
Heat therapy is great. So heat therapy and sauna use is great because we're going to be facilitating further blood flow, right? And when we talk about adaptation wise, that will increase vasodilation. It will increase blood flow systemically. We're going to increase that metabolic nutrient cascade that we want towards the muscles. And there's really no evidence showing that it will dampen any of the effects whatsoever compared to cold therapy, where you are immediately constricting and restricting blood flow upon submersion.
Do you know if there's any data on, I'll do cold then warm, on what temperature you need to, if you're going to do cold therapy, what temperature is good, what temperature is bad? Same idea on the heat part, whether there's a difference between getting in a hot tub, getting in a regular Finnish sauna or infrared sauna. So just what are the options for hot and cold?
So with cold, it's definitely a titration effect because it's going to be subjective, and somebody who's never been in a cold plunge might not want to jump into 30-degree Boulder Creek water.
Boulder Creek, just to be fair, Boulder Creek was, I don't think I ever got in when it was anything below mid 40s. But my little cold plunge where I got to chip away the ice, that's a whole other story.
Well, and you definitely want to ease into this because you can be very cold and it can be detrimental overall. And you definitely don't want to jump into ice cold water for your first time alone, and you don't want to prolong that. You
Well,
don't want
wait,
to
hold on.
prolong that
Wait, I'm laughing because I'm also a 17 times member of the Polar Bear Club. So on January 1st, heading out to the Boulder Reservoir, where they did just chip away the ice, or maybe, the water temperature is somewhere between 32 and 34. And then they would have a thing where you could either just jump in and jump out, or jump in and kind of swim from dock to dock, which of course I had to do that. And I'll never forget, I went with a friend once who, there was two funny parts about this. One is, they said, who wants to jump in naked? And my friend, she raises her hand and says, I do. And then after she kind of commits to this, she looks at me and she goes, oh my God, I haven't shaved my legs. And I said, trust me, no one's going to be looking at your legs. And so we do the thing where we swim across. And this is a person who is a collegiate athlete and just, very intense. And so we swim across from dock to dock. I jump out and I turn around. She's right behind me. And she, gets to the dock and she puts her hands up and then has this look on her face that's a combination of confusion and terror as she starts to sink back into the water. And then I grab her and lift her out. And I said, what happened? She goes, it's the first time in my life where my body just wouldn't do what I was willing it to do. And so that was, that was the other crazy part. But then the other thing is, you do jump into literal ice cold water like that. And for the next few hours, your body has no idea what to do. It's constant. It's trying to change your temperature. I mean, hot on the outside, cold on the inside, cold on the inside, hot on the. I mean, it's like it just can't figure it out for a few hours, which is again, if you're into weird physical experiences, very entertaining. Otherwise, it's annoying and horrifying, and you never want to do it again. But after 17 years, I went, I think I'm done.
I've personally never been in water below 50. So, well, yeah, but water below 50. I have an extreme cold sensation thing, and I'm trying to work down, into
I
it.
don't think I don't think you can work your way down. I think you just need to do it, and like a small dose. What I can tell you is this: if you, when you're jumping in or diving into like literally 30-degree water, if you don't, how do I want to say this? If you try to keep yourself from expecting that it's going to feel cold, if you just kind of go in a little open-minded and say, I wonder what this experience is going to be like, it will be surprising to you. Because I'll tell you what happened for me when I do that. If I really pay attention, I jump in or I dive in, and my brain basically shuts down for a split second. Everything kind of goes white. And it's like, what the hell just happened? My whole nervous system is completely confused. And then you get cold for a moment. But then by the time you're trying to register, what's going on, you're numb. And in fact, that's the most challenging part if you're doing this at like a lake or whatever, is just getting out, because your feet will get numb really fast and you got to be able to, walk. And then you'll get out. And let's say it's, 10 degrees outside. You just jumped in 32-degree water and you walk out of the water and you feel hot. Doesn't matter what the temperature is. It's like you can walk around practically naked and you feel pretty warm for a little while, and then all hell breaks loose. But if you really just pay attention, that initial diving, it's fascinating. It's because it's not what you expect if you can put your expectations aside.
I've done some of the cryotherapies, and of course, the cryotherapies get very cold, but
Yeah.
it's a little bit different than the ice plunge.
Oh yeah.
So but we're gonna work towards it. I'll take a video next time,
Keep
and
you
I'll
posted.
get it down to about 42, and I'll go over my buddy's an MLB pitcher, and we'll go. He has one that he sets it at 42, and we race it a little bit for me, and then the first couple of times I dove in,
Yeah, you just got
try and
to
go through. But
get in, get out. So anyway, all right, so we were talking about sort of optimal temperatures for cold and
yeah.
optimal applications and temperature for hot.
Yeah. So for the individual, it's going to be more of a time duration, more so even than the cold, because if you can facilitate 1 minute, great. That's comfortable for you. Awesome. You will see some type of benefit, neurological benefit from even the immediate dose. If you can get to two, I think recommended dosage is all the way up to 5 minutes. I don't think anybody's recommending past 5 minutes of seated full submersion cold plunge. And I know you brought up, well, the different factors in this. The benefits are not the same by taking a cold shower, right? So
Right.
you're right. So being in an ice bath and being fully submerged is a completely different bodily systemic reaction than just turning your water on cold and having it hit your skin when you're in the shower. So there's really nothing, and cryotherapy is kind of somewhere in between. Right,
Mm.
cryotherapy is a little bit better than necessarily doing a cold shower, but not necessarily as systemically are systemically, I don't know, great. That's a bad term, but optimal compared to cold plunging, right? So a full systemic cold plunge inside of an ice bath is going to be your best way to facilitate that. But if you were someone like me who is very temperature sensitive, start off with a couple of cold showers and work your ways up.
Well, I know that some people, and I know Huberman's one of them, says that the whole benefit is to get to the point where you're shivering. But I know that when I was doing baths before I had the cold plunge, and I would have the water at about 50 degrees, and at 50 degrees, it would take me 15 minutes until I would start to shiver, and it's like that's just way too much effort.
Yeah, no, I sit in and I'm shivering. I'll be the first to say it. I will be dumping some ice in too to lower the temperature a little bit further. And then there was some ice, but I'm working towards it.
Well, the other problem with doing it slowly, I don't know what the geometric configuration of the cold plunge you're thinking of is, but with mine, you basically stand in it and then just sit right down.
Right.
So you kind of go past the nuts and nipples layers pretty quickly because that's where you want to stop it. You just go down, and mostly you scream curse words as you do it, and then as soon as you're all the way down, that stops. But on the way down, you got to say things that would embarrass your mother, and but then and then of course the tricky thing is your body temperature is heating up the water right around you. And so if you're not moving, it's not as bad. If you kind of swirl around, it stays pretty damn cold. And I'm sure you can guess which one I do. So, but do you know if there's anything in the research about whether 50 degrees is better or worse than 40 degrees is better or worse than ice cold or anything in between?
The further you go down, the further the effect is going to be. Oh, right. The sharper the effect is going to be, right? And that's you would see that across all scales, and that's and when I say slowly, I meant more towards temperature dropping slowly, not necessarily like leaning in slowly, but I've slowly digressed down towards 50, and I will continue to go down towards 40. And kind of escalate towards it. Like I said, my buddy has his own little tub system that you can regulate the temperature itself.
I'll be curious to see what happens if, as you do it, how you adapt. And what I'm thinking when I say this is, when we first started Zero Shoes and we were just making sandals, I was curious, like how long I could just stay in sandals throughout the Colorado winter. And the next thing I knew, it was March, and then the next year, same thing. And what I've noticed is that it seems that my circulation has changed, or I've developed more capillaries or something, because now when I go out, my hands and my face and my head can get really cold, but my feet rarely get cold. And this has been years, but it definitely seems like there's been some sort of adaptation. And I'll be curious to see if, you have anything similar to that.
Yeah, I would assume that the slow progression towards, and it may not be optimal. I may just be being a baby about this. And, it's just, and, someone can point out and be like, Jordan, just jump into the cold water. And that may be a faster track to it and may be fine. But this is, at least for me, it felt a little bit more comfortable jumping into that first before I got into some of the lower temperatures. In regard to heat, we can handle some pretty high heats overall. And if you were to be using a sauna, of course, the first thing that you want to do is make sure you're hydrated, right? You don't want to dehydrate in the sauna. And if you need to get out, then you need to get out. You shouldn't be lightheaded. You shouldn't start feeling dizzy or woozy in any type of capacity. And you should always, and I believe in doing things with buddies all the time, right? Whether you're exercise training or doing any type of different type of event that may have some type of reaction for you, do it in a safe manner and in a controlled setting. So that way, if something does go wrong and you want to push yourself a little bit further, you'll have a little bit of help there. Right, but saunas you can get all the way up. I think Joe Rogan's famous for this and going all the way up and doing like 240-degree sauna temperatures. And
well, I'm pretty sure that's in like a quote traditional sauna, not an infrared, because the infrared stuff, that it's a very different feeling. You don't feel like you're walking into super hot air, because you're not. And so that you can have a much lower temperature where you're feeling the effect of it in a very different way. And I don't know that I have a preference at this point. And I didn't know if there was any research about one being better than the other.
I'm actually not too familiar with infrared saunas. I mean, I'm familiar more so with like infrared lighting and like companies that like Juve. Juve creates those large full panel infrared lighting systems that you stand in front of, and that's more of I've actually haven't seen anything on infrared lighting in regard to
Well,
sauna therapy.
it's not infrared lighting per se because it's not going to be at a light frequency. I mean, you don't see anything. You're just basically you're kind of microwaving yourself, and and the advantage is that there's way less involved in using an infrared sauna and mine has I don't know, a couple of panels. They don't feel very warm to the touch, a little bit because there's some fabric on top of it, but you definitely feel like you're getting toasted. And it's, again, a very different feeling than being in like a Finnish sauna where there's higher humidity, for example, especially here in Colorado. If you're in an infrared sauna, there's no additional humidity. So it's just the normal Colorado dryness, add a bunch of heat. So like, I don't think I ever take mine above 140 degrees. Or maybe 145, but in a traditional sauna in the high hundreds, 200, I've done that, and again, just a very different flavor.
Yeah, no, it's definitely really, really hot when you go into those. I don't have any experience with the infrared saunas. I'd be very curious to try one out and to see what at least my own personal perception of the experience is. But I know I do a lot of breathing work, and a lot of breathing work inside of the saunas tends to be very beneficial for at least my mindset and how I feel leaning after a gym session. It's very beneficial for me, so I definitely enjoy it.
When I was a kid, I got into competitive diving when I was 10, and I thought that the sauna was the thing you got in after you got out of the pool to dry off, because that's what I did. Didn't realize that people used it for any other reason.
Did it dry you off? You didn't sweat more after
No,
inside
no,
the
I was
sauna?
10, 10-year-olds, you don't sweat like that. So I'd get in, I'd dry off, I'd get out. It's like, that was nice.
Yeah, and just to caveat back to if you are looking for strength and muscular gains, asana will not inhibit that, or at least there's no current research that's going to show any type of strength or even conditioning or endurance loss through asana whatsoever. And more of and even through endurance and skill-based performance basing ice baths are still very beneficial, right? So you just need to titrate it towards your base and personal skill level and where you are and what you're actually expecting to receive out of your body. And it's good to be aware that by cold plunging yourself, you will dampen the overall effect systemically of your blood flow. And if you understand that, more blood flow equals greater adaptation, then that leads you to your answer.
Right.
Maybe you shouldn't be doing this so often.
Right. Well, that seems like a perfect place to wrap it up with some great ideas for people to ponder as they consider, again, whatever level of activity you engage in. I'm hoping this is really helpful. So, Jordan, if people want to find out more, get in touch with you and for anything that you may be doing, how would they do that?
Yeah. So you can go to adamrehabilitation.com. Adam stands for Advanced Dynamics for Adaptive Movements, or you can follow.
So back up and spell things for people because they'll need to spell things.
Yeah, it's ADAM, just like Adam, rehabilitation. .com, or you can go on find me on Instagram at Adam Rehabilitation as well. Those are going to be where I'm putting out the most of our content for our stability, mobility, and strength work, teaching individuals on how to stay healthy and get back to doing the things that they love most.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I hope people do take you up on that offer to go check out what you're doing and get involved with you in some way. Because, there's a lot of people in this space who are mostly just kind of regurgitating things that they heard and they never really put them to the test. And one of the things that's very fun, I could have said this and should have said it earlier. I can just tell from, hearing the way you've analyzed this, that you are someone who really likes to know what's for real and not just repeat something that, you heard that seemed to work for somebody. And that's a rare and valuable skill in the strength and conditioning world. So kudos to you for that. And again, I hope people take advantage of that. Pleasure. And so for everybody else, thanks for being here. A reminder, go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com to find previous episodes, all the different ways you can find us and engage with us. Speaking of which, if you have anybody if you have any recommendations, criticism, comments, et cetera, that you want to share with me directly, including finding someone who might want to, talk to me about how they think my head is completely up my butt because I have a case of cranial rectal reorientation syndrome when it comes to things like natural movement, I'm up for the conversation. I'm happy to be proven wrong. It'll always lead to something better. I don't think I will be when it comes to, using your feet naturally, but, I'm up for the game. You can drop me an email. Just send something to MOVE at jointhemovementmovement.com. But most importantly, go out, have fun, and live life feet first.